Great. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We are here to talk about the weather, a conversation with some of Denver's leading meteorologists about extreme weather and the changing climate in Colorado. My name is Danny Katz. I'm the executive director of COPERG and the COPERG Foundation. We're a statewide nonprofit, and our mission is to speak up for a safer and healthier world in which everyone is freer to pursue their own individual well-being as well as the common good. I am joined by I'm very honored to be joined by some of our top weather experts in the state. And before I turn it over to them to introduce themselves, I just wanted to provide some quick context. When it comes to the weather for me, I think there's no other topic that really, knits together our community and knits together people like the weather. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're at. You can always connect with somebody. You can always start a conversation with somebody about the weather. The weather is also really important to our lives. We are this outdoor state, and it is critical to our state to be able to have, the ability to know what's the weather going to be. We also know that the science is clear. Our climate is changing, and we're starting to see more extreme weather, and it's predicted that we'll see more extreme weather moving forward. We've already seen some of this across the country. There was an analysis done by the Washington Post that found that just in 2021, 40% of Americans lived in counties that experienced a climate or weather-related extreme event. We've also seen that this literally costs lives. Hundreds of people died last year in climate-related extreme weather events. It also costs money. We saw an analysis that there were over 20 extreme weather events that cost over $1 billion last year across the country. And those dollars mean people's homes, they mean people's property and people's livelihoods. And so it's really important to dig in here and just understand where we're at in Colorado. And like I said, I'm excited to be joined by some of the top experts to answer this question. How's the weather in Colorado? So let me turn it over to them. I'll have each of them introduce themselves briefly. A lot of us, grew up, know them, have seen them for decades, telling us, literally how's the weather. But for people like me, I actually don't know a whole lot about you personally. So I'm hoping you would introduce yourself, where the station that you're with, and just a little anecdote or factoid about you and how you got into the weather predicting business. So, Mike, why don't we start with you, Mike Nelson, and Denver 7.
Well, thank you very much, Danny, and good morning, everybody. It's nice to be with you. I think between the three of us, we might have 70 years of experience in the market.
Oh, my.
Apologies to Kathy. Dave and I have the most. I've been here since 1991, although I first came to Denver in 1981 with the very first television weather computer graphics system and installed it at then KBTV Channel 9 over on Bannock Street and trained the legendary Stormy Rotman and Bill Custer on the first weather computer system that was in Denver. So fast forward 10 years later, and I came to Denver and began work at then KUSA. Worked with Kathy for about 10 years there, and then went over to Channel 7 18 years ago, which is pretty crazy. It's been that long.
Yeah.
I've been interested in weather since I was a little kid. When people ask me, why do you do this? When I was 5 or 6 years old, I remember an amazing thunderstorm in my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin. Tornado warnings and flash floods and trees down, and we had to go to the basement and huddle there. And some people might have become afraid of that. I was absolutely excited and fascinated by it, and I couldn't wait for the next one to arrive. So when you are a weather nut as a little kid, you gravitate to the television weather forecasters because that's the spot, especially back then, when you would find out when the next big storm was going to come. So I can go all the way back to first grade when I was keeping track of the weather. I have weather charts that go back to when I was a kid, and I still keep the daily weather records. Kathy remembers this from the office when I was over there.
I do.
And,
Yeah.
I've just always been a weather nut. So I've been lucky enough to work in the profession that I fell in love with as a little kid.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Mike. Kathy Sabin, 9 News. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself as well, and something about how you got into this business?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Chief meteorologist at 9 News for, well, I'm going on 29 years there now. Yes, I am that old. I grew up on Donner Summit, literally where the Donner Party, that whole thing that you learned in history. But I grew up right next door to the Central Sierra Snow Laboratory. And I think at a very young age, that had an impact on my love of all things weather and nature and climate. I didn't know it at the time. My parents were very involved in the ski industry, so I'm a big skier and outdoors woman. I love horses and running and all the like. Originally, I was thinking of being a veterinarian, so I went away to school. That's what I was studying, and one of my degrees is in animal science. Ran out of money for vet school. Very interested in writing and journalism. Started to intern at a TV station in San Luis Obispo, KSBY. And Sharon Graves was the chief meteorologist then, one of the few women chief mets across the country. Very inspirational, inspiring to me. Once I got bit by the bug, I was on my way. I started in television behind the scenes, running the camera, floor directing, all the rest. I was a reporter and anchor producer, but it was weather when I started to produce weather segments and realize the value of a good forecast and how many people rely on that and depend upon that to stay safe and to make good decisions for themselves and their families. I was hooked. So I started in weather at NBC in San Luis Obispo, went up to ABC in Santa Barbara, went to the Fox affiliate in Salinas, then went up to the ABC in San Jose. And that is where an agent said, we've got this station, you've got to check the station out. And the legendary Mike Nelson, who is one of the, if not the best meteorologists in the country, if not the world, is amazing. He was the chief meteorologist there. And they said, you need to come meet him. And they want to meet you. And I'm like, what? And so I came out to Denver 29 years ago and had lunch with Dave Luigi and Mike Nelson. And I was very fortunate to be picked up for the job of weekend weather with limited experience at the time. And I was basically trained by Mike Nelson. I give him so much credit for how to broadcast well, how to do this job well, what's important in this state, why it's important. The cool thing about Colorado weather, and probably one of the reasons I've been here so long, is no day is ever the same. And at any point, really at any day, the weather can kill you and storms can come in from any direction. And it is such a challenge to broadcast and give valuable information out to all of our various microclimates in 2.5 minutes. So that is in itself a challenge. But I've been here for 29 years, weekend weather, morning weather. I've been on the Today Show, filled in for Al Roker. I love it here. Mike really, he showed me how to broadcast weather in Denver. I went back to school and got my second degree in meteorology, and was lucky just to be under the tutelage of him, and just learned so very much. And now I get to work alongside, Mike and Dave and Dave Aguilera, and just there's so many wonderful, smart, kind people that care about the environment, that care about Colorado and Coloradans. And I'm just so proud to be a part of this group. And I'm really honored that you all are having me here today to be a part of this discussion, because these are not only my peers, but they're my mentors and my friends. So thank you.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're glad to have you. Dave Frazier, Fox 31, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and how did you get into this business?
Well, you've heard from the king and the queen of weather. Now you're going to hear from the jester here. I don't have the tenure, but I've been here for 21, coming up on 22 years. Came in about 10 years behind Mike. Certainly knew of Mike when I came to this part of the country. For me, it was kind of the growing up thing too. I grew up in Boston. We're all familiar with nor'easters, and I used to watch some legends on television. Dick Albert was one of them, and he inspired me. And it was a college professor who nudged me along down the road of doing meteorology and combining that with broadcasting, because I had an interest in television as well. And so was able to marry the two together. Career started out in a small market, Austin, Minnesota. It was quite a shock to the system to go from just outside of Boston to the cornfields and wheat fields and the cows in the Midwest. I hadn't really experienced that before. Moved on from there to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where I spent 3 years. And it was actually a great 3 years because that's where I met my wife. She is also a broadcast meteorologist, and she was working at a competing station. And we started dating and continued our relationship. We both moved and worked at the same station side by side in Des Moines, Iowa. And it was in Des Moines, Iowa, WHO TV, which has a long-standing history, WHO radio. That's where Ronald Reagan got his start, where we really cut our teeth. The news director at the time was, we're not going to produce a lot. We're going to fly by the seat of our pants. And I think that's really where my broadcasting came into be. And then from there, the two of us moved on, got married, went to Cincinnati. We had our first son in Cincinnati, and when he was about a year old, we moved here. Second son here. We love it here. Just like Kathy said, you can't not love Colorado weather. However, when I moved here, I didn't realize how deadly Colorado weather was until you get into the state and you hear about avalanches and ski events and lightning. You know, when you're outside of Colorado, you don't hear about it. But when you get to Colorado, you realize the importance of what it is we do in providing that valuable information. So I think we all take it seriously. And you know, it's a privilege to live here. It's a privilege to work and be on TV and to help people prepare for whatever that next event is. And the challenge of the day-to-day changes certainly makes it worthwhile. So I'm happy to be here and happy to be working with these guys who we've all known each other and connected through the years. As a matter of fact, Mike was the first one to call me about 2 weeks after I got here. Says, I've watched it since you got here. I just want to say welcome to the club. And it's great to be here. And we have a lot of talented meteorologists in town.
That's great. That's great. Do you all have jackets? Do you all have you all?
I feel like we should, right?
You should.
Yeah.
I don't know, do like the Decades Club.
Well, let's start, Mike, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you lay the scene a little bit? We talked a little bit about Colorado is unique. It's a privilege to live here, but it also has some unique weather. Do you want to just start, lay the scene a little bit? And this could be a 30-minute conversation, so let's try to keep it to just a few. But what is it about Colorado that makes Colorado's weather? What are our characteristics? Is it harder or easier to predict? Why don't you go ahead and lay that out a little bit?
I think for any of us, when we've been invited to speak to the local Rotary Club in whatever market you were at, it's always, hey, here in Minnesota or in California, if you don't like the weather, just wait a minute, it'll change. Yeah. Colorado has that in spades, and probably by an order of magnitude more. And if you want to really put it quickly, why is it so tricky to forecast here? It's that 14,000-foot wall out there, and the terrain makes all the difference in the world. And that's, everybody talks about, wow, you can be on one side of the mountains and it's sunny, and on the other side and it's snowing like heck. And that is certainly the case. And it's all terrain driven. It's not just the mountain ranges, it's also the hills, if you will. There's the Cheyenne Ridge, there's the Palmer Divide, and there's the Raton Ridge. And those west to east fixtures, geographic fixtures, make a big difference in our weather. Upslopes and downslopes are really the key. When the air is going up the hill, it tends to drop its moisture. When it's going down the hill, it warms up and dries out.
Sure.
Yeah. And Danny, I'll add on to that too. I think when I took the job and was leaving Cincinnati, one of my good friends in Cincinnati, who had been working in Cincinnati for years, he said to me, "You really want to do that? You really want to go to the mountainous West and deal with forecasting in the mountains, because it can be a challenge." And to Mike's point, it is all about wind is key here. Wind direction, whether it's upslope, downslope, whether it's direction at the surface and the features that are here in the mountains. And somebody once told me, this is a little oversimplified, but imagine a pool filled with water and the filtration system is causing eddies in the pool. And now run a fan over the top of that and blow some wind across the surface of the wind. Now let's throw some huge boulders into that water and cause even more eddies and changes. Now I'm going to put a ball on the top of the water. Your job, forecast where that ball is going to be in an hour. And so it's kind of like that. Yeah. You've got all the influences of surface wind and upper level winds, and you've got the mountains, that monolith that's in the way, and which way is the wind going to go around the mountains. Think about how wind kind of whips around downtown buildings. It does the same thing around mountain peaks and through canyons. And so all of that plays in. Wind here, wind direction, wind speed is key.
That's right. And Dave, I love your analogy there, if I may. People always ask, what's your favorite weather to predict? And what's the most difficult? And I think a lot of us just love fall here because we get to exhale, right? Yes. And it's beautiful. I find winter weather probably, it can be the most boring because the storms are so slow moving. You can see them from, the models weeks away and days away, and just kind of see as they get closer how to fine tune that forecast. But I think you guys will agree that severe weather season is no joke in Colorado. And when I came here from California, and I just remember Mike Nelson looking at me like I had no idea, and I didn't. And he was talking to me about the hail events and the tornadoes. And I'm like, what? I know about snowstorms and blizzards and all of that, but what do you, there's a lot of tornadoes here and hail. And around here, there's a lot of us that sort of have this thing like east is a beast. That's what I always tell the kids. If there's any type of an easterly influence to the wind, it sometimes is going to enhance whatever's happening. Northeast, southeast, due east. Sometimes you're going to get that really good severe weather day, or you're going to get that deep upslope with a good winter storm. But Dave, I love your analogy about the ball and how high it will go, because I think about severe weather forecasting like, and you two will understand this, the young people listening are going to go, what? But you remember making popcorn the old fashioned way with a pot on the stove and you put oil in there, right? It tastes so good. It's so good. But that's severe weather forecasting to me. You've got the pot, which could be like a stationary front draped along the front range of the Rockies. You've got the heat, turn the burner up, get your heat going, threw the oil in, you got your moisture. You throw the kernels of corn in there. All the ingredients are there. Those little dudes are going to pop. Okay. But severe weather forecasting is like, which kernel is going to pop first and where? Which one's going to drop a tornado? Which one's going to drop a hailstone? I mean, where are they going to go? So it's like, are these all going to pop at once into these fun little thunderstorms, or is one going to come out and hit you in the eye and burn your cheek and you got yourself an F4 tornado? I mean, that's, to me, it's like you got your pot of popcorn, and then it's like, we can only control and analyze and forecast so much. And that's what makes our job so cool, is we don't always really know. We can give you a good idea, but we don't always really know. We respect Mother Nature.
Yeah, that triggers in me a question about just microclimates. So to that sort of analogy of individual popcorn, and I guess the question to any of you, are there specific parts of the state that seem to be more challenging than others in terms of being able to predict the weather, or predict the if there's extreme weather that's going to be happening there, places that maybe surprise you more than other places?
When I first arrived here, I was speaking to a meteorologist that worked up at NCAR, went out to lunch with him, and he starts talking about something called the Denver Cyclone. And I was trying to kind of be polite and everything. I had no idea what he was talking about. And he kind of went on for a while. He goes, on those cyclone days, you're going to be really busy. And finally, after about 20 minutes, I said, can you tell me what that actually is?
I think I said that to you, Mike. And then I said, explain the Longmont anticyclone when you're done.
Right. It sounded like a good name for a sports team.
Right.
But very simply, it's a convergence zone where air comes together. And when air comes together, it is forced to rise. It can't go into the ground. And so when we have a southeasterly surface wind coming up and over the Palmer Divide, it tends to cause it to curve back toward the west. And we get a convergence line of kind of a east or southeasterly surface wind with the westerly air coming off the mountains. And it forms from right about over Monument Hill, right up over
the Castle Pines.
Castle Pines, yeah, down toward
like
Dave and Kathy's house.
It's like a baseball catcher's mitt, right, Dave?
Yep.
A little yep.
And that's where we get thunderstorms that develop. And because you've got this kind of twisting, converging air at the surface, you draw that up into the updraft of a thunderstorm. That's like tornado central, and it goes right up through Bennett and right up by DIA. And we get a lot of large hail and tornadoes, albeit most of them are smaller tornadoes, but it's a real legitimate feature. And so we look at the Denver Cyclone as a very common microclimate event that occurs to us. And we know on those cyclone days, just like the guy told me in 1991, you're going to be really busy. And we are. It starts early and it goes on all through the afternoon. And sometimes those storms that form right here end up being the storms that 24 hours later are still dumping severe weather in the Midwest, right all the way to St. Louis.
Well, in
Yeah.
this winter, we've had those cyclone events with some of our winter storms to give us those heavier bands of snowfall. You guys both know what I mean, where somebody gets 1 inch, somebody else getting 8 inches of snow is part of that winter phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always tell people the same thing, that the eastern plains of Colorado from I-25 out to the Kansas and Nebraska border is the genesis of the bigger storms that then continue to migrate all the way through the Ohio Valley. One of the things I used to hate when I lived in Cincinnati was the timing of those storms would start here around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. You could set your clock, your watch by them. And then they would leave around 8 or 9 on the eastern plains. The problem is they would arrive at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes up in Cincinnati. And so you've got tornado warnings in the middle of the night. We used to deal with that in Des Moines as well. You've got these nocturnal storms, and they're just fierce, and they just can scare you because you don't have the daylight to kind of assess the situation. I'm not talking meteorologically, I'm talking from a viewer, a person that lives there. It's the dark of night and the skies are barking and there's warnings going off and sirens, and you look out the window, you have no idea. And so I'm glad we live here where the threat is not as big. You don't get the granddaddies that you get in Oklahoma and Texas and Nebraska and Kansas in, you know, the thick of Tornado Alley. So we've had our share of tornadoes over the years, certainly, but we don't have to deal with them. Usually there's a land spout ones. We had a great one last year. You guys remember that the helicopter picked up on out there in Weld County that we just sat and watched, and they're beautiful things to look at as long as they don't do damage or cause death.
So Dave and Mike, do you agree that the lead time now with the technology that we have is giving people more time to prepare when there are those severe nocturnal thunderstorms and the like, that most people now know to have a weather radio, have the alerts on their phone, have the TV? Do you agree that people have enough lead time now compared to when you worked back in the Midwest?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's gotten so much better. And, you know, to have just on your device that you can get that warning, and it geolocates you and tells you that there's a tornado warning just for your area, because the weather radios are terrific. And if folks don't know, if they're watching, you know, they look like this. And they're really great. You can go to midlandradio.com and order one, and they will give you a warning and a forecast, and highly recommended. But the one thing that they do is they issue that warning for all of Arapahoe County or all of Weld County. And of course, that's going to do a lot of false alarms to a lot of people. The new apps that are out there, and there are many of them that are available. Our stations all have an app, and there are plenty of them out there. But if there's a warning for northwestern Elbert County, just a little tiny box, that's the only area that gets warned for it. And the benefit to that is fewer false alarms. So yeah, the technology has just changed tremendously. Kathy, I know that you are a big fan of both Yellowstone and most recently 1883.
Oh,
here's what and I loved it too. But here's what I'm thinking. 120 years ago, okay, pioneers are coming across with a Conestoga wagon, and
you saw that episode
going along
with
like
the
this, and
tornado?
one of these big Eastern Plains storms develops. All right, so the whole way, the husband has been trying to sell his wife, honey, this is going to be great. We're going to have our own farm. We're going to not have to answer to the man. I mean, it's going to be so good. And all of a sudden, this storm pops up, and there's baseball-sized hair tearing through the fabric and the wagon, and they're just getting blasted by it. And I'm just thinking, on that buckboard, what kind of a glare is the wife giving the husband? And she's just like,
well, this wife would be on that Palomino riding with the Indian up on the hill.
No, you'd be yellow hair, light,
brown hair, lightning with the brown hair.
Lightning with the brown hair. But
oh my gosh, that tornado was cool.
They're, you know, we've always had it's such damaging and violent weather that can pop up very, very quickly. And as going back to Kathy's initial point, the technology has gotten so much better now that we can do. And when we're on the air and there's a tornado situation going on, the viewership just spikes. I mean, because people are very aware of it, and they still turn to the local, despite all the apps and everything else, they'll turn to the local stations. And our job really is to be there to update, but also to reassure.
Yes.
And so you want to say, especially, and I do this a lot, and we're usually out at the same time, so I can't see what you guys are doing, but I will just say, hey, to the kids, if you're
Yeah.
home and mom and dad aren't back from work yet, just keep it right here and we'll just keep talking. We'll be on the air as long as the storm is on. I get so many positive feedbacks from viewers about that because, kids get anxious about it. Not everybody is like we were and like, this storm is great.
Right.
I love this. A lot of them are
Yeah.
very frightened, and it's okay to be frightened because it's pretty scary stuff at times.
Yeah.
Well,
We
and
did
it's
the
our
same thing.
job to educate. I mean, that's what I always tell kids and parents that come. Mike, remember they'd come into office all the time with their terrified kids. And I always tell them, look, if you're in your home and in your car, for the most part, you're safe. Watch the show, enjoy the show, and educate. The more you understand about our amazing Colorado weather, the more you will be in awe of it, and you'll want to learn more, and you'll find, it's something to be respected, but you don't need to be afraid if you're smart and, you take the precautions. So knowledge is
Interested to
power.
ask about the Denver Cyclone you were mentioning earlier. Is that a phenomena that's just part of one season, or that could really happen at any time of the year?
Oh, anytime.
Anytime.
Yeah.
It's a big driver of summertime severe weather.
Weather,
It
right.
also enhances our snowfall in wintertime.
Snow bands. Yeah. But by the same token, to Mike's point, the swirling wind that comes into Denver on that cyclone is more of a threat, I think, in the spring and the summer because of the intensity of the thunderstorms that develop.
Agreed.
But in the winter, that southeasterly wind is a downsloping wind into Denver and can cut Denver's snowfall accumulation down hard if the wind switches. So, Danny, we started off talking about how wind is key, and it is something you watch very, very closely. We also pay attention to, dew points and moisture in the air. Is there drier air being sucked into the storm? Is that going to shut off snow production? Is that going to kill the thunderstorms? There's just so many factors that we're monitoring all the time. I don't think, years ago when data was limited to us, you'd only get certain amount of data once a day, sometimes twice a day. You were kind of making a forecast and riding it. Now I think we're forecasting 24/7.
Right.
The data is available to us that we can monitor things hour by hour. And that's what we do every evening. The forecast that you see us put on the air, myself at 4 and 5 o'clock may be slightly changed by the time I re-hit the air at 9 and 10 o'clock. And we have the digital platforms now. If we're in an event, whether it's a severe event or a prolonged winter storm, can always jump on the digital platforms and update there as well. So sometimes the forecast, somebody hears like, well, I thought you said 2 to 4. And I'll be like, yeah, I said 2 to 4 at 5 o'clock. But if you joined me at 9, we cut that to 1 to 3 because we saw snow or, snow production going. So I think we're always forecasting. The message has to be changing all the time because the technology and the amount of data that's available, you can literally swirl your head looking at the amount of data that's available now. You just kind of have to put blinders on and find a path that works for you. Everybody forecasts a little differently. Certain people trust certain computer models or guidance and numbers more so. We're always double checking. Mike showed you his little clipboard. I keep my forecast and then I go back the next day and say, did the model I picked work? Did it pan out the way I thought it was going to as I made my forecast? So it's just it's a changing environment. And, I'm glad to be forecasting in today's environment than going back decades and decades ago where, it was paper to pen.
Would
Absolutely.
you guys agree? People say all the time, why do we need television meteorologists? I mean, we have apps, we have computers, we can get all the information that you get. And my response to them is you need someone to interpolate that information. You need a scientist, somebody who's lived here for a while and understands, because while an app is okay, and some of the other models and forecast, data things that you'll find are okay. If you have a scientist like Mike, Dave, myself, we've been here 20, 30 years, more, you have somebody that's taking that and going that extra step for you and breaking it down and saying, wait a minute, and making it even more of a hyperlocal or a microclimate event. And I just feel like what we do is important in that. And do you agree?
I do.
As long as it works for a few more years, I'm golden. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I do.
One of the things that I know for me, it's always comforting to be able to have these things I can say like, oh, Colorado, 300 days of sunshine. I can always rely on that. Or never plant your garden before Mother's Day because, you know, there's going to be a snowstorm. I'm curious, what are some of the rhythms that you all go, yeah, you could set your watch to these kinds of things in Colorado? And are any of them starting to change? Are you starting to notice that actually you need to, you know, you can plant earlier than Mother's Day, or actually no, it's even more erratic? So I guess kind of curious what rhythms we have, and are you seeing any of them change? Maybe
Well, I don't
Mike,
wanna-
do you want to start with that?
Well, the world is getting warmer, and we will get into that in more detail in a little bit. But globally, temperatures are increasing due to the increase in carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels. However, I still would not plant my garden before Mother's Day because there's still plenty of cold weather and snow that occurs, and it still is a very good metric on that. I think we are seeing it most notably fire season.
Yeah.
And fire season used to be really a season. And obviously we saw with the Marshall Fire at the end of December that we can have wildfires pretty much at any time of year now, not only here, but certainly across the entire Western United States. And that is a function of a warming world.
And
Yeah.
Mike, will you speak to just since I've known you these past 29 years, I mean, wouldn't you say the frequency and intensity of weather events has really grown and changed because of the warming climate? We're seeing more devastating weather events as the weather tries to kind of equalize the atmosphere from getting too warm or too cold. Since I started with you back in 1993, I don't remember. It just seems now we're having a greater frequency and a greater intensity of the storms that we're seeing.
I would agree with you on that. And we certainly saw the Front Range floods back in 2013.
September. Yep.
And, you know, weather is what you get and climate is what you expect. And so what we're going to see in our climate is a gradual lengthening of the warmer season. Long term, we'll see less snowpack, although it'll be greater demands on water across the West because the population certainly isn't decreasing. So when we get a good snowy winter, and so far after a very slow start, we've had good success with the snowpack, that is a blessing because long-term, the odds are not that we'll have snowier years in our mountains, but less snowpack up there and melting out sooner with the warmer weather beginning in the spring.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I agree with that. And that's something that, you know, we've been watching. You know, that's a concern. Mike pointed to population. You know, when I got here 21 years ago, I think the population of Colorado was a little over 4 million, and now we're at 5.5. You know, it's the old expression, if you build it, they will come. Well, they're here, and we don't have room for them on our highways. And there's a concern about our water supply. There's a concern about the snowpack. All of that plays into, you know, the economy and dollars and everything else. It plays into the wildfire season. Imagine the snow season being shorter. There's just a lot of concern there on my end about the wildfire seasons. I mean, you think about the Marshall Fire, Hayman, Cameron Peak, East Troublesome. There's just been a lot of big fires, if you go back over the last 10 or 20 years, that have been devastating and chewed up a lot of not only property, but landscape as well. So that's, you know, that's kind of the stuff that I think concerns us. Is the changing climate and how it impacts the growing population, not only in the infrastructure in Colorado to be able to handle it with our swelling roads and everything else. But, you know, I pulled Danny just out of curiosity yesterday. The historic snow average for Denver has been 56.9 inches. That's going back to records of 1882. However, the 30-year average going back to 1991 is only 49 inches. And we always talk about March and April being our snowiest months historically.
Yeah.
However, it's now February and March.
Yep.
February is outdoing March. And especially in the last, I think, 4 out of 5 years, February has beat March for snow production, which is good. I mean, we'll take it. The 1 year that it didn't beat it was last year because of the blizzard we had in the middle of March that pushed March to, I think, 34 inches. So there's some concern there about that. I mean, we're still going to forecast rain is rain, snow is snow. You know, dry conditions and heat and cold. Those are not going to change as far as our forecast. We just have to message it a little better. And those intense events that Kathy's talking about, it does seem like we get more of them. Bigger hailstorms, larger hailstones, deeper snow, stronger wind, more frequent lightning. So it's not continuous. It's not like we're seeing weeks of it. It's just that when we do see it, it seems to be more extreme, more muscle.
Dave, along that line, when you talk about the messaging as a meteorologist, because I have a lot of pressure from viewers, and rightfully so, because we are the scientists and the experts, to be providing climate change information on a daily basis in our weathercast. I agree, but we are at the mercy of management and producers and that 2.5-minute weather hole. How do we do that? How? And Mike, I think you do a great job of this. Maybe you can suggest to me how to do this on a daily level, or just a way to integrate some of this knowledge and give people tips on what to do when they don't give us enough time or the right platform or forum like this to discuss it. That's a daily problem I have. I don't know how to do that.
Well, we have a special opportunity, and I think obligation, to talk about climate change. And the opportunity is that we are, for many Americans, the only scientists that they know. I mean, they don't run into the great climate scientists at NCAR walking down the street, but they invite us into their living rooms every single day. So there's already a level of trust and invitation for us to talk about it. The obligation is that we are asked all the time, as the station scientist, the producer will come up and say, hey, there was an earthquake. Can you talk about that? Or there's a tidal wave or an asteroid or a meteor shower, whatever.
Yeah.
So those are not meteorology, but they are science and physical science. And so it behooves us to know enough about climate science to be able to talk about it. Plus, our specialty is to take very complex things and explain it to the average American in a couple of minutes. And so if we know enough about the basics of climate change and the effects of carbon dioxide and warming and trapping heat, if you will, we can use our analogies, our storytelling techniques to explain it. This is my latest little book, and it's called The World's Littlest Book on Climate. It is available. There's a free download that I can get, so that you put it on the Coperg website.
Sure.
It's 10 facts in 10 minutes, just a little tiny book. And the idea is there's some great big thick volumes on climate change, but the average American's not going to pick that up and read it. We designed this, and I wrote it with Peter Tons, who's like Mr. Carbon Dioxide up at NOAA in Boulder. He ran the lab at Mauna Loa in Hawaii. He knows more about the effects of atmospheric carbon dioxide than pretty much anybody I've ever met. But Peter is on the 50th floor of knowledge. And as a scientist, if he tries to bring that down to where he thinks he's going to explain it to the average person, he's still 25 flights above him. And so our job as communicators to the average person is to explain these complex things in easy to understand terms. The one that I find works very, very well is to think of each molecule of carbon dioxide like a feather in a down comforter. And as we add those feathers to the atmosphere, what we're doing is making that down comforter thicker, more effective at redirecting or trapping heat that would otherwise escape into outer space. And so as we dig up this fossil carbon that's been buried for hundreds of millions of years and release it into the atmosphere, we're making the blanket thicker, we're trapping the heat, we're warming the planet. Now, that took me 20 seconds to give an analogy like
right that. In a 2.5
so,
minute weathercast.
Right.
There you
so
go.
So on a quiet day, I don't necessarily need to show the national satellite loop. And so maybe I can just focus in and spend a little time on climate. We need to drip on our audience. It's not like, oh, there goes Kathy again talking about that global warming. You don't have to do it every day, but just put it in there on occasion. And if the producer's saying, hey, we're going in talking about a story that's about the ice melting in Antarctica or something, you say, I can work with that. And I can just do a quick little droplet of climate change. Now, I see this question from Michael Booth from the Colorado Sun about, do you get any pushback? Oh, and by the way, Jan's laptop, we'll get you where you can get the free download of the book. Danny, I'll get that to you so you have that. Or you can just, my email is mike.nelson@thedenverchannel.com, and I can send it to you from there. But here's the thing. when I talk about climate change, I will get a nasty gram or two,
Yep.
usually from the same couple of people. But I get 10 times as many attaboys as I do nasty grams. And what I do is whenever I get somebody that writes in and said, thank you for linking the Marshall Fire to our warming world, I make sure that I write back to them, but I also copy that to my management and make sure that my news director and general manager know that I'm getting good feedback, much more good feedback than the negatives. When I get a negative one, I respond to that viewer, but I also copy that response to my bosses. So I would say to my broadcast friends here that, yeah, I get 10-to-1 positives over negatives on that. So, for us, here's the deal. We're on this call because we've been doing this for a long time in Denver. And so, I mean, Dave, if you get a nasty email from somebody, it's like, yeah,
Nobody ever sends
Kathy,
me
same
emails
thing.
to Dave. They send them to me.
But I don't worry about that anymore.
No.
But if I am Daniel Grant, or if I am one of your younger Mets at your station, and they get a nasty email, that's a little scary because it's like, gee, I'm new in this market and they don't know me that well. And they also copied my boss. And basically that's cyberbullying, if you will. If somebody sends you that and then they copy that to your boss, they're trying to bully you into being quiet about the science. And so one of the things we do within the AMS, which is our American Meteorological Society, we have a group called the Station Scientist Committee. And our goal is to empower especially the younger meteorologists on the air to have the courage and the knowledge to talk about climate change during their weather reports. Not all the time, but just when it's appropriate.
Well, and they're going to be the next generation that's going to have to deal with that more on a daily impact. So as they're making their forecasts, that's something that's changed over the years. It used to be okay, Danny, to put a forecast out that said partly cloudy, a chance of thunderstorms, and 75 to 85 degrees. Well, now it's down to, we're trying to hit the number right on the head. We're trying to give you the exact window of when it starts and ends, and we're looking for the impact. Impact has become a huge word. You see it, National Weather Service products that they're putting out too, especially with social media.
Yes.
Really unique graphics that drill down to what I should expect as a person living in Denver between 2 and 6, when the snow starts, how much is going to end, what might it do to the roads, and so forth and so on. So we're drilling down, we're kind of peeling the onion more and more and more to get down to what's important to the viewer, what is the impact. And then if you take the climate change and you add that into what might be, the summer ahead or the winter ahead, those are ways you can do it. I agree with Mike. You just got to keep it a little bit here and a little bit there. It's unfortunate that when you say climate change or global warming, it becomes a political hot button.
Yes.
And you're just going to get it from both sides. So sometimes it's better to stay away from it. Other times take it head on and take the emails. And to Mike's point, I think we're all veterans. We've been on TV for a while. If you're on television as a meteorologist, a journalist, a sportscaster, you got to have a thick skin. You just get thick skin. You have to stand your ground and know what you're doing and do, take the battles here and there and don't worry about the negative comments. Focus on the positive ones.
And as a frequent viewer, I can tell you that one thing I like, seeing the patterns. I mean, to me, so much of the value you bring to this conversation is just pointing out these patterns that for years were one way and are starting to shift. The thing you mentioned earlier, Dave, 56.9 inches, now we're down to 49 inches. Now we're starting to see, instead of March, it's more February. That context is extremely helpful. And so the more that you all are helping to sort of point out those patterns, I think that's another way that you can do it, quite
well,
effectively.
We're learning constantly as well. We may have degrees and seals and all the rest, but I feel like I'm constantly learning. And sometimes just by watching colleagues across the street or up at NOAA and NCAR, I feel like if you're going to be involved in weather and climate, you need to be learning every day because it's changing every day. And we don't know everything going forward. You have to be a student.
One of the other things, Danny, as long as we're on this topic, that we talk about all the time, and I'm sure Kathy and Mike have their input on this, is we talked about the growth of the population. And that, one of the messages I think we need to get out is to those who are new to Colorado. because I think it's important for them to not only understand our weather patterns, that we have 4 seasons, but what I'm seeing more and more is we can't seem to get through even the smallest snowstorm on the roads. And I'm not going to point fingers anywhere, but I think it's a combination of too many cars, too many people inexperienced in driving in winter weather. Maybe we don't have enough of a budget to get at the amount of plows we need on the road. It just seems like, I grew up in Boston, so I grew up driving rear-wheel drive car with a stick in the snow, and I have no problem driving in snow. And today's cars, you're all-wheel drive, you're front-wheel drive. Hopefully, people are using all-season tires or maybe switching to a winter tire. But it just seems like, even down here on the south side of town where I am, making it up over Ridgegate and to the top of the Palmer Divide, and then Monument Hill's the next highest point. It's like we've got a new Monument Hill now. It used to be Monument Hill, but now it's Surrey Ridge. Truckers can't get up there. People are going into the mountains up I-70 past Genesee with rear-wheel drive. We had a guy on a camera going up there a couple of weeks ago during the snowstorm, and he was in a Mustang, a rear-wheel drive Mustang, and he's going sideways up the hill. So
I think it speaks to education.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for us. It's almost as if people coming to Colorado need to be given like a booklet, like Mike's 10 little things about climate change. But here's the seasons. Yeah. Here's how the roads are. Here's how you need to prepare. Don't do this, don't do that. And let them know about don't plant your flowers, before Mother's Day. And oh, by the way, I don't want to blow the Chamber of Commerce bubble, but it's actually only about 260 days of sunshine, not 300.
Well, I think you and Mike do such a great job because, and this is something that I should probably start incorporating as well, is you both really highlight those pinpoint weather alert days or the weather alert days on the planning forecast. It's like, hello, pay attention. And maybe that's what we need to speak to some of the younger people that are new here that don't understand. Just because you leave when it's sunny and 40 outside doesn't mean that's what you're going to be driving home in. And that 50-car pileup on I-25 at Emerson over the weekend, when that was not a lot of snow, speaks to pay attention, people. I mean,
slow down.
Yeah.
The whole idea behind that is to Kathy's point, is to highlight when we think there will be a larger impact. It's not to scare people. It's not to make them run. There will be challenges within that messaging. You want to try and hit the start and the end time. You don't want it to linger on. But just trying to get everybody prepared for, what your day might look like. Some people are going to handle it fine. Others are going to struggle.
Yeah. I mean, it just underscores we're all in this together in this state, and it's important that we're all working together, whether it's, literally keeping the roads moving or helping to reduce pollution or whatever it may be. But I wanted to just use the last few minutes here to just look ahead. And if each of you would just answer this sort of, what's one extreme weather pattern you're most concerned about as we're starting to look ahead, as we're starting to see changes and looking ahead? What's one thing that concerns you? And there's probably a million, but I guess I'd be interested to hear what from each of you, what's one extreme weather pattern or events that you're most concerned about looking forward?
I think number one is water. I mean, the old adage that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting still holds and always has in Colorado. Water is the most important resource.
Right.
We know the population is going to increase. We know that the demands on all the river basins are going to increase, not only from our state, but from all of the population increase. And if the world gets warmer and hotter or drier, well, we're going to have less water. How do we plan for that? It's always been a contentious issue in Colorado, dating back to the early years of the state, and it's only going to become more extreme.
Yeah.
And Mike, to your point, go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with Mike. I think Colorado has some unique water sharing. Obviously, it's not just Coloradans that enjoy the snow melt, the runoff, and the rivers that feed out of the mountains to other states. We're sharing our water supply. We've got to uphold those relationships, but also make sure we're not draining it for Colorado. I think the biggest concern is drought. I think we've seen more and more of that. And that leads into the fires that we have, as Mike mentioned before. It's now year round. So I think drought is the big concern. We seem to be having longer periods of drier weather. I mean, this year alone, we set a record for the longest days between the last measurable snow and the first measurable snow. It was over 100 days. Everybody was thirsty for the snow. Now everybody's complaining because it won't stop snowing. But, I always say never give up on a season, right? You can go into
Yeah.
a season lacking. You can go into a season, in like a lamb, out like a lion. You can start roaring and then it drops off, but never give up on a season until it's over with. And we certainly have seen that here this winter season. Hopefully the snow will come. We're benefiting the last couple of years. Last year, we ended up at over 80 inches in Denver, well above the 49 or 56, total averages. So we've been doing well, and I'm just keeping our fingers crossed that we can slow the population growth, keep the drought level, but I'm just a little concerned. My focus would be on drought.
And I think it's interesting that all three of us agree on the warming of the atmosphere and the drought and the fire repercussions, because I think some of the studies are showing that because of the warmer temperatures we're seeing, there's actually less precipitation being recorded in the northern hemisphere. And then the warmer the temperatures, you're seeing more of that evaporation, which means there's just less surface water not getting down, into those reservoirs. And even though the snowpack, we're seeing some good numbers now, Dave, to your point, seeing it so early in the season now as a trend is not always a good thing for us. And so it kind of has this ripple effect, the water, the drought, the fire, and then rinse and repeat. And I think that, and we are made up of water. We can't survive without water. Oops, sorry.
No problem.
Someone's here. But I think it's interesting that all three of us agree, warming of the temperatures, the water, the drought, the fire danger.
Absolutely. Great. Well, we're going to have to wrap up, but I would love to give each of you a minute to just, if there's anything else that was on your mind coming into this event that you wanted to say. Dave, do you have anything else you want to kind of get out there before we wrap up our event?
No, just, we're here, as we've talked about, we're here to try and be the voice of what the forecast will be. While we're competitors, we all work in the same industry. We've all known each other for a long time. We're friends, we get along. I will tell you, in my time in this business of coming up on 35 years, I've worked in some markets where even meteorologists within the same station don't sometimes see eye to eye, and you've got personalities in the way. I was pleasantly pleased when I got here to Denver. Just about everybody, I won't even say just about, everybody in this market is friends. And we all know each other, and we all work towards the same goal, even though we compete on different television stations. So the messaging is, this day and age, you're going to get maybe a slight variation in a forecast between one person or another, but you're not going to see Mike saying it's going to be 80 and Kathy and I saying it's going to be 35 and snowing. And if it is, we'll point that out to Mike. We'll maybe tell him he's going down the wrong path. But I just think, look, we're here to be that face. We're here to get you through the next event. And given the social media, the digital platforms, there are more places that you can find us to get the information. Even if it's on your phone and you're following on an app, just be careful that I tell people, don't always take the app at 100% value. There does need to be some interpretation. Our forecasts are pretty good. The technology is good these days. The amount of data we have that's coming in, the forecasts are changing. We're updating them all the time. So don't tune in on Monday and hear about snow on Saturday and not tune in the rest of the week. You're going to want to tune in on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, because that forecast may be changing as we get closer to the event on Saturday. So we're here to help you. We love hearing from our viewers. We enjoy feedback. None of us is 100% right all the time. And we're interested in hearing people's opinions and willing to help out in any way. I love it when viewers email me and ask me about, hey, I'm down here in, the Palmer Divide, and I'm talking snow, and I've got this appointment I've got to go to. What do you think? Can I get there? I have no problem answering that email. So reach out to us. We're here.
Thank you. Kathy, anything last that you wanted to say?
I agree. It's like the country song, we're all kind of fishing in the same fishing hole. We're all in this together, and it's a give and take, and we're learning and we're trying to educate, and our relationship with our viewers and everybody out there is part of that learning and growing process. But you all help us tell the story, show us what areas are having problems that need to be addressed or highlighted. And it's an honor to do what we do. It's a privilege. And when we get our forecasts right and we feel like maybe we've made a difference for someone or help them make a good decision, that feels really good. And that's, I think, why the three of us do what we do, is because here in Colorado, as we have all learned, the weather can be life-threatening any time of the year. And there are a lot of very smart aviators here, commercial pilots, meteorologists that, hold us to a high esteem. There's a lot of very weather aware people that live here. And it's a challenge, but it's nice to be working with people that you respect and getting that messaging out there. And hopefully we can make a difference.
That's great. Thank you. Mike, anything final thoughts?
First of all, it's just nice to see everybody. We see everybody on the quad splits on TV every night, but it's nice to actually catch up a little bit. So great to see everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to broadcast and be invited into people's homes. And it's great to be able to do it in a beautiful state like Colorado. For me, as the grandfather of 3, I really look at climate change as our existential threat as we head into the decades ahead. It will affect them much more than it will affect my life. And so I feel very strongly that we need to make the changes necessary. When I'm just looking at the comments here, Rob, why don't you, I would love to comment to you further on that. Why don't you shoot me an email and I can expand on that a little bit more, because we won't have time in this, but I appreciate your chat. When people say to us, boy, it must be great to have a job, be wrong half the time and still get paid. I used to blanch at that and it bothered me. It doesn't bother me much anymore. But my response is so oftentimes, you know what the best job is? Major League Baseball, because you can guess wrong 2/3 of the time and end up in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. I like that.
You can use that one. Danny, thanks for setting this up for everybody.
Yes,
tuned in.
Danny.
We really
Thank you.
appreciate.
And Mark too. Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Thank you.
Very,
Mark.
very good.
Yeah.
It's been fun. We should do this. We should do this again.
More
Absolutely.
often. There's a lot
Absolutely.
of information that needs to get out there. That's a great idea, Mike.
We'd love to host this once a year. And thank you all for taking the time. Thank you all for your hard work. And hopefully everybody on the call tunes in tonight to 9 News, to Denver 7, to Fox 31, to hear how the weather is going to be, and to also follow you all on all the major platforms you have. And of course, with COPER, we are working to tackle our climate crisis, and we have a number of ways that you can help us in that as well. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.